Now we're going to talk about codes. So why do we need codes? Well, one reason, computers organize information by codes. Just think about anybody who's reporting data into EPA's AQS database. You've got all those codes for the method, for the unit, and that's because, for one thing, words are a lot more difficult to standardize. So codes standardize the descriptions and categories. This is what this code means exactly. So for example, the state of Colorado, one problem is with using words is that people don't standardize whether they're going to abbreviate it CO or whether they're going to spell it out. But a computer knows if it's looking for state codes that 08 is the FIPS code for Colorado. So it's really useful in that it doesn't let you make a mistake as long as you select the right code. And we have these long codes in TEISS, and that's because there's actually a paragraph-long process description of what that code means. So what is FIPS? FIPS stands for Federal Information Processing Standard. And what that means is that there's a code for states and counties. Tribes have codes within EIS, so Emissions Inventory System codes. So Kickapoo tribe is signified in code form by 861 and is a 3-digit code. States and counties have codes that are 2 digits long for states and 3 digits long for counties. So what you will get sick of are source classification codes. So these are codes in TEISS that are used to organize processes. Okay, so there are over 9,000 of them. EPA is in charge of issuing these SCCs, and you'll notice that point sources have an 8-character long SCC, and non-point, non-road, on-road, event, and biogenic have 10 characters in their SCC. Every single process in TEISS must have an SCC. So the word process is a good description. It's what exactly happens to that activity data that you gave it, like cords of wood, because it's different if those cords of wood are burned in just like a fireplace or burned in a indoor stove that has a catalytic converter. So the codes are organized in a way that's pretty cool, because even without memorizing all of them, of course, nobody ever would, but you can know from the first few characters what it is you're talking about, and you can sort. So for example, for point sources, you may have an SCC code like this, and the full 8 characters are this. So there are 4 levels of descriptions that correspond to how many digits you're talking about in the SCC. So the SCC1 description is the first digit, and that means industrial processes. The SCC3 description means the first 3 characters in the code, and in this case it's 02, which means food and agriculture. So if you had a bunch of stuff going on that pertain to industrial processes and food and agriculture, they would all have these first 3 codes, 302. Then SCC6, what that means is the first 6 characters, so that's 302005. What that means all by itself is feed and grain terminal elevators. And then the last 2 characters, and in this case 01 is the last 2 characters, that means shipping and receiving. So we know right off the bat that for this process there's probably other stuff besides shipping and receiving, but those would be the same for the first 6 characters. It would just be these last 2 that would be different. One of the things that you're going to find is that the search in TEISS doesn't work very well. There's just so many processes that happen when you've got a lot of people, like we do in this country, doing stuff. So if you search, for example, in TEISS for wheat elevator, it may not find the codes that you're looking for. But what you're going to get adept with is scrolling through the list of codes, finding the food and agriculture codes, and then look at feed and grain terminal elevator description, and you're going to have to actually go through and scan through the codes yourself and learn a lot by doing so about what's happening on your land. You can't have duplicate SCCs in one location, say a tribe, for non-point sources, which makes sense because non-point sources are sources that individually don't qualify them as a point source, but collectively they can emit a lot of the pollutant. So since these sources are inventoried for an entire area, right, by non-point source definition, then you couldn't have duplicate non-point sources in the same inventory. So you might have catalytic wood stove sources in your inventory, but that would have to include all of the catalytic wood stoves in your area. You may have other wood stoves that are not catalytic converter wood stoves, and that would be a different SCC. So for example, for this non-road process, so I'm in the non-road sources category of input, the input or linear data entry panel. I look at non-road processes, and I see here we've got a lot of source classification codes that are just the same, except that they have different types of emissions. So remember, this is non-road, and we have these things that we ride around on, and they evaporate some fuel. We slosh around and spill some when we refuel, and then of course there's the exhaust. It has the exception of we've got these three kinds of emissions from non-road sources. And if you want to figure out what's been reported for this particular county, which is Beltrami County in Minnesota, we actually click on the emissions. So you go to non-road emissions, and then you can see that there are these emissions from this particular SCC code. But what happens is in the TEISS report, they sum them for each pollutant. So all the ethyl benzene emissions are summed together for that particular non-road source. Now, for point sources, of course, you can have duplicate SCCs as long as they're for different processes or units or facilities. You're probably going to have different types of engines at different facilities, or even for several units at the same facility. Like if you've got a lot of government buildings and then perhaps multiple boilers used to heat those multiple buildings in the government building complex. And there are more codes. But don't worry, the SCC and the NAICS codes apply only to point sources. And these are economic sector type of codes, like what business this is. The NAICS codes replaced the SCC codes in 1997, and every point source must have an NAICS code. So again, these are only for point sources. So remember, point sources only have NAICS codes. How to find them in TEISS. This is the panel that shows you the NAICS codes, and you can see based upon the small grabber bar here, there are a lot of them. So how do we get to that in TEISS? So how do I view the SCC codes in TEISS? I go to View SCC Codes, and it populates this window with a list of codes that are no longer used, and for some reason on my version of TEISS it opens up to that part of the whole long list, and you can tell that they're no longer used because they're grayed out. But if you pull this grabber bar to the right up, you can see the ones that are in black are the ones that are in use now. So you can see that it is possible to search through these codes. I'm going to open up this panel and show you that it's hard to see, but over here you have the option of searching, for example, any word starting with, and I'm going to type in swine just to see what comes up. and then I have to hit enter because the Go key doesn't show up in this version of TEISS the way I have it installed on this computer. So I type in swine and then enter to search, and it searches only for any word starting with swine. So you can see that in this SCC 7 description, we've got swine production operations with lagoons. We know what those are. Now say you realize, oh, it wasn't swine, but hog, and you want to show all fields. Just get rid of the word swine and then enter, and it brings up all of the codes again. One thing to keep in mind is this is just viewing them. So remember, view SCC Codes brought this up. This is to research codes. If you want to add a source with these codes to your project, you have to go to Input View. But more on that later. This panel is super useful for researching codes. Also, it's important to point out that the defaults are to search using all fields and to search using any word starting with. And sometimes when you do a search, it opens up too many, and you just want to search for example, starting with. And just because it doesn't show up in my installation of TEISS, you can see that we've got search using all fields and search using selected field, and any word starting with those drop-down boxes, and then you have to click the binoculars button to search, or if you don't see it on your installation, hit enter, and then when you want to revert to showing all of them, click show all. Now if you have your screen cut off the way my screen is cut off, and you can see here, then in order to show all of them, and in this case I've been searching for landfill using any word starting with, and then I realize, oh, it's not a landfill, it's, let's just say, a dump, even though I don't think that that's the right word, and I want to show all now. If I leave the landfill there and hit enter, it's not doing anything besides the same search. But if I remove it and hit enter, now it'll show the same search. So let's go back to landfill, and what we need to look at now is how the search can vary depending upon which of these drop downs you have. So play around with this. It may be that you need to search for all words, for example, or refine your selection. Also note that you can sort within these, which is super useful. So here you've got the full SCC code, and then you've got this SCC2 description, and you can see there's so many miscellaneous area sources, for example. You click that down arrow and you can see all the selection of the SCC2 codes in words, and then the SCC4 production. So in agriculture production and livestock, you've got a lot of different stuff that goes on. You could see here, if you scroll to the top of all this livestock, you could see a lot of stuff happens with livestock. You've got beef cattle production composite, and that looks like a catch-all. As you scroll over to the right, not elsewhere classified. And you could see there's more information to the right. Sometimes it's very useful, including this material column. I'm going to scroll back to the left, and so you can see how all down to SCC4, you've got agriculture production, livestock, on and on and on. All these different things that are possible processes with agriculture production, livestock. Now also notice is that there are two tabs here. This is sort of hard to see, but this is for area SCC codes, and you can see we've got all the way, because we're looking at area, we've got all the way to SCC 10. And that's because area sources are pretty complicated. But then if you look at point, you can see here's the SCC code, and the description's SCC1, so that first character, external combustion boilers, has a lot of different things that go on. Then SCC3, so that's the first three, 101, external combustion boilers, then electric generation. and we scroll down till we see something different. Oh, here's industrial. So that changed the SCC code over here, and you could see that it may be burning anthracite coal or bituminous coal. And then it goes further to the SCC 8 description, where it gives the specific process, the overfeed stoker or the underfeed stoker for this bituminous coal. And if you pull the bar over to the right, you can see information. If you want to be able to read it more clearly, you hover your cursor there and pull that out to the right, and now you can read exactly whether this is pulverized coal wet bottom or pulverized coal dry bottom. So again, the edge is not showing on my installation version. So what these fields are is this search using all field, and this is search using selected field. And you can, I'm going to go back to all fields because it's much more successful for me to search with all fields. And then if you don't see the drop down arrow, you can click in here, and then you would search for example, you know that there's something with the word landfill in it, but you don't know if it's whether the beginning of the code or the end of the code in terms of the word description. So I'm just going to click any word in there, and I'm going to hit enter. And remember, when we were searching for landfill before, we were searching for area sources with the word landfill in it. Now we're in point, and it comes up with different sorts of things. For example, this is internal combustion engine, electricity generation, landfill gas, and then SCC 8 further. Is this a turbine or reciprocating or a crankcase blow-by? So make sure that you're in the right tab for what you're researching and really use these sorters. For example, if you know that it's probably something to do with turbines, you can click this SCC 8, and then all the codes that correspond to this word landfill that you searched for are in alphabetical order, so you can go and find the turbines, and you can see that there's a few of them that begin with the word turbine. Now, the reason that this tab says areas, plural, and also, remember, we're not using the word area source anymore. So why does TEISS have this weird word areas? It's because it includes all the sources that are not point. So areas includes non-point, on-road mobile, non-road mobile, and event. So let's pretend that we need to find an SCC for a point source that I have, which is a lumber mill. First, I make sure the point tab is active. Then I type in lumber mill and then click enter, or the binoculars if it appears off to the right. And it comes out with everything that has lumber mill as any word in it. So this is pretty annoying because you can see it's got a lot, and I'm looking for just a plain old lumber mill. And it's asking me if it's Manufa resin storage tanks. If your installation of TEISS isn't cut off like mine is, over here there's a number preceded by the pound sign that tells you how many records. And sometimes it's a lot. It's hundreds, way too many to scroll through by hand. So, okay, let's just look for wood, any word, search all fields. And that comes up with, and you can see that this came up with wood/bark waste, so that's quite a few of them. And I want to look for pulp and paper, something like that, wood products in the SCC 3 description. Oh, look, here it is, and there's a lot of them. So I want to look specifically for SCC 8, looking for, so I'm looking through, trying to find something, sawmill, so many of these. Oh, here it is. So now we're down to SCC 6, and we've got a bunch for sawmill operations, and you can see that for point sources, remember it only goes up to SCC 8 characters, And so this is the very thing that this is calculating, or this is the code for the emissions of. What happens at a sawmill? You've got log debarking, log sawing, sawdust pile handling, all these things of these specific processes that happen at a sawmill. So that is an example for point sources. So again, use these grabber bars to see the full description if it doesn't show up, and click on this to alphabetize, and that helps you search. If, for example, you know something begins with SCC 8 and you know exactly what you're looking for alphabetically, sawing operations, for example. So say we typed in wood, and we want to know, well, how many do I have to scroll through also in terms of these different SCCs. If you click on this drop down arrow, it will tell you what your choices are. So in terms of the point sources with the word wood in them, in terms of the SCC1, there aren't that many options. You can either burn it outside, you can burn it inside in a boiler, you can use it in an industrial process, or you could throw it away. And then if you want to look, okay, within those, what are the further subcategories? Well, you would do that in an industrial operation, maybe mineral products like, I don't know what you'd be making out of. Maybe you use wood to burn to heat up the mineral products, obviously pulp and paper and wood products, and then throwing it away. And then space heaters. Then if you go to SCC 6, you can see further subdivided. So these drop-down boxes are really useful. For example, firefighting. What's that? So in firefighting, they use wood pallets somehow. They throw them out.